The red sky above Cathera Prime burned with alien fire. Commander Tejo stood at the observation window of the Planetary Defense Center, watching enemy ships descend like deadly rain. 3 days had passed since the Vorthak Empire arrived with their massive invasion fleet. 3 days of endless fighting. 3 days of watching good people die. "Sir, the eastern wall is failing," Captain Sora reported from behind him. Her uniform was torn and dirty from the constant battle. Dark circles ringed her eyes from lack of sleep. "We have maybe 2 hours before they break through completely." Tejo nodded without turning around. He had expected this news. The human colony of Cathera Prime was home to 50,000 civilians. They had built a good life here on this distant world, farming the rich soil and mining the valuable crystals deep underground. Now all of that was ending. The Vorthak were not known for mercy. They conquered worlds with brutal efficiency. Their soldiers stood 8 feet tall with thick armor that could stop most human weapons. Their energy rifles could cut through steel, like paper. Worst of all, they never stopped coming. Wave after wave of alien warriors poured from their landing ships. "How many soldiers do we have left?" Tejo asked. "About 300 combat ready," Sora replied. "Lieutenant Jinwoo's squad is holding the north gate. Sergeant Dong-Hyun has the south, but sir, we're almost out of ammunition." Through the window, Tejo could see the enemy forming up for their final assault. Thousands of Vorthak soldiers moved in perfect formation across the open ground between the forest and the colony walls. Their weapons gleamed in the red light of the burning sky. Behind them, more ships continued to land. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Sang Min called out from his station. "It's from a small transport ship requesting permission to land." Tejo frowned. "A transport now? Tell them to stay away. This is a war zone." "Sir, the pilot says he has important cargo, something that might help with the defense." "What kind of cargo could possibly help us now?" Sora asked. "We need weapons and soldiers, not supplies." Tejo was about to refuse the landing request when something made him pause. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the feeling that they had nothing left to lose. "Where does this ship want to land?" he asked. "The main landing pad, sir, right in the center of the colony." "That's suicide. The Vorthak will target it immediately. The pilot says he understands the risk." Tejo looked out at the alien army again. In an hour, maybe less, they would attack. Nothing could stop them now. The human defenders had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered 30-1. "Give them permission to land," he decided, "and send a squad to escort whoever is on that ship to safety." The small transport ship appeared on the horizon, just as the Vorthak began their final preparations. It was old and simple, not military at all. Enemy fighters could have destroyed it easily, but they seemed content to let it pass. Perhaps they wanted to see what foolish human would come to this doomed place. The ship landed with a soft hiss of cooling engines. Lieutenant He-jin led a squad of 5 soldiers to meet it. They expected to find refugees or maybe a supply shipment. Instead, the cargo door opened to reveal a single passenger. An old man stepped out onto the landing pad. He wore simple brown robes that looked handmade. His hair was white and pulled back in a traditional style. In his weathered hands, he carried a wooden staff that appeared to be carved from a single piece of tree. Nothing about him suggested he was anything more than an ordinary civilian. "Sir, you need to come with us immediately," He-jin said, approaching the old man. "This area is not safe. The enemy will attack very soon." The old man smiled gently. "Thank you for your concern, young soldier. My name is Wansu. I have come to help." "Help?" He-jin looked confused. "Sir, with respect, this is a military situation. Unless you have weapons or reinforcements, there's nothing you can do here." "I understand your doubt," Wansu replied. His voice was calm and quiet, but somehow carried clearly over the noise of the battlefield preparations. "Tell me, where is the enemy army positioned?" He-jin pointed toward the open ground beyond the colony walls. From the landing pad, they could see the massive Vorthak formation. Row after row of alien soldiers stretched across the plain. Their battle cries echoed in the distance as they prepared their weapons. Ah, yes, I see them. Wansu nodded. Quite a large force. Sir, please, Haijin urged. We need to get you to the shelters. But Wansu was already walking away from the landing pad, not toward the safety of the buildings, but toward the colony's main gate, toward the enemy. Sir, stop, Haijin called, running after him. You're going the wrong way. In the command center, Taeho received the report with disbelief. An old man? That's the important cargo? Where is he now? He's walking toward the front lines, sir, Haijin reported over the radio. We can't stop him, he just keeps walking. Through his binoculars, Taeho could now see the figure in brown robes moving steadily across the open ground between the colony and the enemy army. The Vorthak had noticed him too. Their war cries grew quieter as they watched this strange human approach. Is he insane? Sora asked, taking her own binoculars. He's walking right into 10,000 enemy soldiers. Should we send a team to retrieve him? Jinwoo asked over the radio from his position at the north gate. Taeho watched the old man's steady progress. Something about the way Wansu moved caught his attention. Each step was perfectly placed. His pace never varied. The wooden staff in his hand seemed to catch the light in unusual ways. No, Taeho decided. Let him go. We have our own problems to worry about. But even as he said this, Taeho found himself unable to look away. The Vorthak army was doing the same thing. Their preparation sounds were growing quieter. Some of their frontline soldiers had actually stopped moving to watch the approaching human. Wansu continued his steady walk across the battlefield. He showed no fear, no hesitation. Behind him, the human defenders watched in fascination and horror. Ahead of him, 10,000 alien warriors began to shift uneasily in their formation. The old monk was halfway between the colony walls and the enemy army when something extraordinary began to happen. The air itself seemed to grow still. The constant sound of weapons being prepared faded away. Even the wind stopped blowing. Taeho felt a strange sensation, like the moment before lightning strikes. Every hair on his arms stood up. In the distance, he could see that the Vorthak soldiers were feeling it too. Their organized formation was beginning to waver as individual warriors looked around nervously. Sir, Sang-min called out, his voice filled with wonder. The enemy communications are going quiet. They're not giving orders anymore. What do you mean? I mean they've stopped talking, sir. All of them. Through the binoculars, Taeho watched as the massive alien army gradually fell silent. The old man in brown robes continued his approach, still 50 meters away from their front lines. But somehow his mere presence was affecting thousands of hardened warriors. For the first time in 3 days, the battlefield grew completely quiet. The silence that fell over the battlefield was unlike anything Commander Taeho had ever experienced. It was not just the absence of sound, but something deeper. The very air seemed to hold its breath as the old monk continued his steady approach. Toward the Vorthak army, Lieutenant Haijin crouched behind the colony wall, watching through his rifle scope. The alien soldiers stood in perfect formation, but something was wrong with them. Their usual aggressive posture had changed. The 8-foot-tall warriors with their thick chitinous armor were shifting nervously from foot to foot. This is impossible, Captain Sora whispered beside Taeho in the command center. 10,000 Vorthak soldiers don't just stop fighting because one old man walks toward them. Through her binoculars, she could see individual aliens turning their heads to look at their companions. These were the same creatures that had destroyed 17 worlds without mercy. They had conquered entire star systems with brutal efficiency. Yet now they seemed uncertain, almost afraid. The Vorthak commander, a massive creature called Krixvar, stood at the center of his formation. His ceremonial armor was decorated with the bones of his enemies. Scars covered his face from 100 battles. He had never known defeat, never felt fear. But as he watched the human approach, something cold moved through his chest. Hold positions. Krixvar ordered his troops, but his voice lacked its usual strength. Prepare to fire on my command. The frontline soldiers raised their energy rifles, but their movements were slow and uncertain. The weapons that had burned through human defenses for 3 days now felt heavy in their hands. Several warriors found their aim wavering as they tried to target the approaching figure. From the human observation posts, Sergeant Dong Hyun reported what he was seeing. "Sir, something strange is happening to their weapons. The energy readings are fluctuating." "What do you mean?" Taeho asked. "I mean their rifles are powering down on their own. The targeting systems keep resetting." Young medic Yuna had climbed to the top of the medical building to get a better view. At 19, she was the youngest member of the defense force. She had spent the last 3 days treating wounded soldiers, watching brave people die fighting an impossible battle. Now she watched something that made no sense at all. The old man was still walking. Each step he took was exactly the same length as the one before. His breathing was steady and calm. The wooden staff in his hand seemed to glow with a soft inner light, though that might have been a trick of the red sky above. "Look at the ground," Yuna called down to the others. "Look at the ground around him." Lieutenant Jin Woo raised his binoculars and focused on the area around the monk's feet. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed it. The dirt and rocks seemed to be arranging themselves in small patterns as Wan-Su passed, not moving exactly but settling into geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. "Communications are getting stranger," Sungmin reported from his station. "The Vorthak fleet is trying to contact their ground forces, but the responses make no sense." "What are they saying?" The ground commander keeps repeating that everything is normal, but his voice sounds different. Scared, maybe. "And, sir, some of the orbital ships are reporting equipment malfunctions." Taeho felt a chill run down his spine. The Vorthak Empire's technology was far superior to anything humans possessed. Their ships could destroy planets. Their weapons could cut through any armor. If their equipment was failing, what could possibly be causing it? On the battlefield, Wan-Su had closed the distance to less than 100 meters from the alien front line. This was well within range of their weapons. A single Vorthak soldier could have killed him easily from this distance. Instead, the entire army seemed frozen in place. Private Chan Woo, the youngest soldier in Jin Woo's unit, whispered what they were all thinking. "He's doing something to them. I don't know what, but he's doing something." The air around the monk began to shimmer, like heat waves, but the day was not hot. The shimmer spread outward in slow ripples, touching the first row of Vorthak soldiers. Where it touched them, their armor seemed to grow heavier. Their weapons drooped in their hands. Krixvar tried to give the order to fire, but the words would not come out of his mouth. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he felt something he had never experienced before. Not just fear, but a deep understanding that he was facing something beyond his comprehension. The monk was 70 meters away, then 60. The Vorthak soldiers wanted to move, wanted to raise their weapons, wanted to charge forward as they had been trained, but their bodies would not obey. It was as if the very concept of violence was being drained from the air around. Themtoden, engineer Park Jun monitored the situation from the technical center deep within the colony. His instruments were picking up readings that should have been impossible. Energy levels that defied physics. Quantum fluctuations that suggested reality itself was being manipulated. "Sir?" he called to Taeho over the communication system. "I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies centered on the old man's position. It's like he's bending space around himself." "That's impossible," Sora said. "Yes, ma'am, it should be, but the readings don't lie." 50 meters from the Vorthak formation, Wan-Su came to a stop. The silence that had fallen over the battlefield now became absolute. Even the burning buildings in the colony seemed to crackle more quietly. The red sky above grew still. The old monk stood perfectly straight, his wooden staff planted firmly in the ground beside him. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was so slow it was barely visible. To the human defenders, he looked like a statue. To the Vorthak warriors, he looked like something that should not exist. For a long moment, nothing happened. The two armies faced each other across 50 meters of empty ground. 10,000 alien soldiers with their weapons ready, facing one old human man with nothing but a wooden stick. Then Wan-Su opened his eyes. The moment he did, every electronic device in the Vorthak army began to malfunction. Weapon systems shut down. Communication equipment went silent. Even the simple targeting computers in their helmets flickered and died. But more than that, the aliens themselves began to feel something they had never experienced. A deep certainty that they were not the strongest beings in the universe. That power came not from technology or numbers, but from something far more ancient and fundamental. The monk had not yet moved. He had not spoken. He had not raised his staff or made any threatening gesture. Yet somehow, by simply standing there, he had changed everything. Commander Tejo realized he was holding his breath. Around him, every human defender watched in amazement as their impossible situation transformed into something even more impossible. The Vorthak army, conquerors of worlds, stood paralyzed before a single human monk who had done nothing more than walk across a battlefield and open his eyes. The moment stretched like a held breath across the battlefield. Wansu stood 50 meters from the Vorthak formation, his eyes now open and calm. The alien soldiers remained frozen in their attack positions, their weapons useless in their hands. Commander Tejo watched from the command center, knowing he was witnessing something that would change everything. The old monk's presence seemed to press against reality itself. Engineer Park Jun's instruments showed readings that made no scientific sense. Space and time appeared to bend around the small figure in brown robes. The very atoms in the air seemed to vibrate with potential energy. Captain Sora leaned forward at her observation post. Through her binoculars, she could see the Vorthak commander Krixvar struggling to move. The massive alien warrior was trying to raise his weapon, but his arm moved like it was pushing through thick liquid. Sweat ran down his scarred face as he fought against an invisible force. "Sir, the orbital ships are reporting critical system failures," Communications Officer Sang Min announced. His voice was filled with wonder and confusion. "They're saying their engines are shutting down on their own." "All of them?" Tejo asked. "Every ship in the fleet, sir. They're going into emergency power mode." Lieutenant Jinwoo crouched behind the north wall, watching the scene through his rifle scope. The Vorthak soldiers in his view were trembling now. These creatures that had killed his friends, that had burned their homes, were shaking like frightened children. But they were not shaking from cold or fear. They were shaking because the fundamental forces that held their bodies together were being affected by something beyond their understanding. Young medic Yuna felt it too. From her position on the medical building, she could sense a change in the air itself. Her medical training had taught her about the human body, about how energy flowed through living systems. But this was different. This was energy on a scale that touched everything, from the smallest particle to the largest star. The monk began to shift his weight. It was the smallest possible movement, barely visible to the human observers. He was simply adjusting his stance, preparing to transfer his wooden staff from his right hand to his left. To anyone watching, it would look like nothing more than an old man getting comfortable. But the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ground beneath the entire Vorthak army began to crack, not randomly but in perfect geometric patterns that spread outward from Wansu's position. The cracks formed circles and squares and shapes that had no names, each line precise and purposeful. Lieutenant Haijin watched in amazement as the cracks reached the feet of the nearest alien soldiers. Where the lines touched them, their heavy boots sank slightly into the earth. Not far, just enough to make movement impossible. 10,000 warriors found themselves rooted to the spot as if the planet itself was holding them. The energy rifles in their hands began to spark and smoke. Weapons that could melt steel started to drain their power cells in seconds. The advanced targeting systems that had made them so deadly flickered and went dark. In moments, the most powerful army in the galaxy became as harmless as farmers holding broken tools. Sergeant Donghyun felt the vibration through the colony walls. The monk's simple movement had created a resonance that traveled deep into the planet's core. Ancient human teachings spoke of chi and energy flow, of masters who could touch the fundamental forces of the universe. But those were supposed to be legends, stories told to children. "The quantum readings are off the scale," Engineer Park Jun reported, his voice shaking with excitement. "It's like he's rewriting the laws of physics in a localized area." Scientist Li Na joined him at the instruments. As the colony's chief researcher, she had studied energy manipulation for decades. She had theories about consciousness and its effect on quantum mechanics. But seeing those theories proven in such a dramatic way left her speechless. The monk completed his movement. His staff was now in his left hand instead of his right. To any normal observer, nothing significant had happened. An old man had simply shifted a piece of wood from one hand to another. But the result was that an entire army was now completely helpless. The air around the Vorthak formation began to thicken, not with moisture or dust, but with potential energy made visible. It looked like the space around the alien soldiers was turning into clear crystal, beautiful but absolutely solid. They could breathe, they could think, but they could not move a single muscle. Commander Krixvar tried to speak, to give orders to his fleet above, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. The communication device in his helmet crackled once, and went silent forever. For the first time in his life of conquest, he was truly helpless. Private Chanwu lowered his rifle and stared at the scene. He was only 20 years old, fresh from training when the invasion began. He had never seen real combat before this week. Now he was watching something that would be talked about for centuries. An entire army stopped by a single movement from one old human. The effect was spreading beyond just the ground forces. In orbit above the planet, the massive Vorthak battleships found their weapon systems shutting down. Their engines sputtered and went quiet. Navigation computers showed error messages in languages that did not exist. Even the life support systems began to operate differently, as if they were following new rules of physics. Yuna climbed down from the medical building and ran toward the front lines. As a medic, she wanted to understand what was happening to the alien soldiers. Were they injured? Were they dying? Or were they experiencing something completely different? Through the colony's defense perimeter, she could see the Vorthak warriors more clearly. They were not hurt, not in any physical sense. But their eyes showed something she had never seen before in an enemy. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of profound confusion. They were beings who understood the universe through technology and force. Now they were face to face with something that operated by completely different rules. The monk stood perfectly still in the center of his created field of altered reality. His eyes were closed again, his breathing slow and deep. The wooden staff in his left hand seemed to pulse with a soft inner light. Around him, the geometric patterns in the ground continued to grow more complex, creating a mandala of cracked earth that was both beautiful and terrifying. Commander Teho realized that his mouth was hanging open. He closed it and tried to think like a military officer. The situation had changed completely. His colony was no longer under attack. The enemy army was neutralized. But he had no idea how or why. "Sir," Captain Sora said quietly, "what do we do now?" It was a good question. Military training had not prepared any of them for this situation. How do you proceed when an old monk defeats an entire invasion force by moving once? The answer would have to wait. On the battlefield, Wansu opened his eyes again and began to walk toward the paralyzed alien army. His movement was still perfectly measured, each step the same length as all the others. But now, instead of approaching enemies, he was walking toward 10,000 beings who had just learned that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. Wansu walked among the paralyzed Vorthak soldiers like a gardener moving through rows of silent trees. The alien warriors could only watch as the old human passed between their ranks, his wooden staff tapping softly against the cracked ground. Their weapons remained useless in their hands, their armor as heavy as stone. Commander Teho left the command center for the first time in 3 days. He needed to see this with his own eyes, not through binoculars or reports. Captain Sora and Lieutenant Jinwu joined him as they made their way to the colony's main gate. The sounds of battle that had filled the air for so long were gone, replaced by an eerie quiet that felt both peaceful and unsettling. Communications Officer Sang-min intercepted transmissions from the Vorthak fleet above. The alien commanders were demanding explanations from their ground forces, but getting only confused responses. The fleet's own systems were failing in ways their engineers had never seen before. They're trying to understand what happened, Sang-min reported. But sir, their language has words for every type of weapon and technology. They don't have words for what they're experiencing now. From orbit, Fleet Commander Zeth Cole watched his screens fill with error messages. His invasion force had conquered 17 worlds using superior technology and overwhelming firepower. They had studied human colonies for decades, cataloging human weapons, tactics, and physical capabilities. Their computers contained detailed analysis of human strengths and weaknesses, but nowhere in their vast database was there any mention of what they were witnessing now. Engineer Park Jun and scientist Lee Na worked frantically to understand the phenomenon. Their instruments showed that the monk's single movement had created a cascade effect through the quantum fabric of space itself. Local gravity was fluctuating in impossible patterns. The electromagnetic field around the planet had shifted into configurations that should not exist. It's like he touched something fundamental, Lena explained to Taeho over the communication system. The basic forces that hold matter together. But sir, this should be impossible for any living being to achieve. Young medic Yuna had reached the edge of the battlefield. She could see individual Vorthak soldiers up close now. Their large eyes showed confusion and something that might have been wonder. These creatures had spent their lives believing that strength came from technology and numbers. Now they were learning that the universe held mysteries their science could not explain. The monk stopped at the center of the alien formation, directly in front of Commander Krixvar. The massive Vorthak leader tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. His ceremonial armor, decorated with trophies from conquered worlds, seemed to weigh him down like chains. For the first time since landing on the battlefield, Wansu spoke. His voice was quiet and gentle, but it carried clearly to every human and alien present. "You have traveled far from your home," he said to Krixvar. "You have conquered many worlds, destroyed many lives. You believe this makes you strong." Q, alien commander's eyes widened. He had not expected the human to speak his language, but somehow the words were perfectly clear. "Strength," Wansu continued, "is not what you think it is. True power does not come from weapons or numbers or the ability to destroy. It comes from understanding, from harmony with the forces that create rather than destroy." Lieutenant Haijin listened from his position near the colony wall. The monk's words seemed simple, but they carried weight that pressed against his mind. Around him, other soldiers were lowering their weapons, sensing that the battle was over in ways they could not fully understand. "For 40 years, Wansu said, his eyes still fixed on the Vorthak commander, "I have studied the ancient ways. I have learned to quiet my mind until I could hear the heartbeat of the universe itself. In silence and meditation, I discovered that consciousness is not separate from the physical world. It is part of the same fabric that holds the stars in their courses." Sergeant Dong-hyun felt a chill run through him. He had grown up hearing stories of the old martial arts masters from Earth, of monks who could perform impossible feats through spiritual discipline. But those were supposed to be legends, not reality. The monk raised his wooden staff and pointed it toward the sky, where the Vorthak fleet hung in orbit like dark clouds. "Your ships are powerful, but they are built on incomplete understanding. You have mastered matter and energy, but you have ignored the role of consciousness in shaping reality." As if responding to his words, the alien ships above began to experience new malfunctions. Not damage, but a fundamental change in how their systems operated. Weapons designed to destroy became unable to target living beings. Engines built for war found themselves capable only of peaceful exploration. Private Chan Wu watched in amazement as the transformation spread through the fleet. He was young and had not yet learned to dismiss the impossible. To him, what he was seeing made perfect sense. Of course, there were forces beyond technology. Of course, consciousness could affect the physical world. How else could art be beautiful, or music move the soul? Scientist Lee Na monitored the quantum fluctuations spreading outward from the monk's position. Her instruments showed that local space-time was being rewritten according to new rules. Rules that favored harmony over conflict, creation over destruction, understanding over domination. "The readings suggest he's interfacing directly with the quantum field," she reported to Commander Taeho. "But sir, human brains shouldn't be capable of processing information at that level. Maybe human brains can't, Teho replied, watching the monk through his binoculars. But maybe human consciousness can. Wansu lowered his staff and looked directly at the paralyzed alien commander. Your people have great knowledge of the physical universe, but you have forgotten that consciousness itself is a force as fundamental as gravity or electromagnetism. In your conquest of worlds, you have conquered only matter. You have never learned to conquer yourselves. The old monk began to walk again, moving through the ranks of silent alien soldiers. As he passed each one, something changed in their eyes. The confusion remained, but it was joined by something new. Curiosity, wonder. The beginning of understanding that the universe was far more complex and beautiful than they had imagined. Commander Krixvar found that he could move again, but slowly. The invisible force that had held him was releasing its grip, but not disappearing entirely. It was as if the monk was teaching rather than imprisoning, showing rather than punishing. Above them, Fleet Commander Zeth Cole received a transmission that would change Vorthak history forever. It was from his ground commander, but the words were unlike anything in their military protocols. Fleet Command, Krixvar's voice came through the speakers. We have encountered something beyond our understanding. Not a weapon or a technology, but a demonstration of potential we did not know existed in the universe. Request immediate conference with Science Division. We have much to learn. Captain Sora looked at Commander Teho with new respect for the species they both belonged to. Sir, if humans can do this, if we have this potential within us, what else don't we know about ourselves? It was a question that would reshape humanity's understanding of their place in the universe. But first, they had to understand what had just happened on the battlefield of Cathera Prime, where an old monk had stopped a war by moving once and revealed that consciousness itself might be the greatest force in the cosmos. 3 hours after the monk's single movement had changed everything, the Vorthak fleet began its withdrawal from Cathera Prime. But it was not a retreat born of defeat. It was the careful departure of beings who had discovered that the universe was far more complex than they had ever imagined. Commander Teho stood at the colony's main gate, watching as Vorthak soldiers slowly regained their ability to move. The geometric patterns in the ground were fading, but the effects of what had happened would last much longer. These alien warriors who had conquered 17 worlds now looked at their weapons with uncertainty, as if seeing them for the first time. Fleet Commander Zeth Cole transmitted a message that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. People of Cathera Prime. His translated words came through the colony's speakers. We came here believing we understood the nature of power. We have learned that we were wrong. Your species possesses capabilities that our science cannot explain. We withdraw not in defeat, but in recognition that there are forces in the universe greater than technology or numbers. Captain Sora approached Wansu as he walked back toward the colony. The old monk appeared tired but peaceful, his wooden staff supporting his slow steps. The brown robes he wore were simple and worn, showing no sign of the incredible power he had just demonstrated. Master Wansu, she said respectfully, how is this possible? How can one person do what you just did? The monk smiled gently. I am not special, young warrior. What you saw today exists within every human being. We have simply forgotten how to access it. Lieutenant Jinwoo joined them, his rifle slung across his back. For 3 days he had fought with weapons and tactics trying to defeat an enemy through force. Now he had seen a different kind of strength entirely. But sir, Jinwoo said, the ancient martial arts, the stories of masters who could perform miracles, we thought those were just legends. Legends often contain more truth than history books, Wansu replied. Your ancestors understood something that modern humans have forgotten. They knew that consciousness is not separate from the physical world. It is part of the same fabric that creates stars and moves planets. Young medic Yuna had been helping treat Vorthak soldiers who were experiencing confusion and disorientation. To her surprise, they were not injured, just overwhelmed by their first encounter with forces beyond their understanding. The aliens are asking questions, she reported to the group. They want to know how you did what you did. Their medical officers are trying to understand what happened to their bodies. Engineer Park Jun and scientist Lee Na arrived with their portable instruments, still recording impossible readings from the area where the monk had made his stand. The quantum fluctuations were slowly returning to normal, but the data they had collected would revolutionize human understanding of consciousness and physics. "Master," Lena said, "our instruments show that you somehow interface directly with the quantum field, but human neural networks shouldn't be capable of processing information at that level." Wansu sat down on a piece of broken concrete, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "The mind you speak of, the thinking mind, cannot do such things. But humans have another kind of awareness, deeper and older. In meditation, when all thoughts become quiet, you can touch the source from which all things arise." Communications. Officer Sang-min reported that messages were coming in from across human space. Word of what had happened on Cathara Prime was spreading rapidly. Colonial governments wanted to know if there were other humans with similar abilities. Military commanders asked if this power could be weaponized. "No," Wansu said firmly when told of these inquiries. "What you witnessed today cannot be used as a weapon. It arises only from compassion, from the desire to preserve life rather than destroy it. Try to use it for violence and it will slip away like water through your fingers." Commander Kriksvar approached the group slowly. The massive Vorthak leader no longer seemed threatening. His ceremonial armor looked heavy and unnecessary. The scars on his face told stories of countless battles, but his eyes now held something that had not been there before: humility. "Human monk," he said in his translated voice. "My people have studied your species for many cycles. We cataloged your weapons, your tactics, your physical capabilities, but we never looked for this. Why? Because you were looking with your minds instead of your hearts," Wansu answered. "You sought to understand humans by examining what we build and how we fight. But the deepest human potential lies not in what we do, but in who we are." Sergeant Dong Hyun had been listening to the conversation while organizing the colony's defenses. The battle was over, but he was still a soldier, with responsibilities. Yet something the monk had said made him pause. "Sir," he asked, "are you saying that all humans have this ability? That any of us could do what you did?" "The potential exists in every human being," Wansu replied. "But it takes time to develop. Years of meditation, of learning to quiet the constant chatter of the thinking mind. Most people in your modern world are too busy, too distracted to undertake such training." Private Chan-woo stepped forward eagerly. At 20, he was young enough to believe in possibilities that older people might dismiss. "Master, could you teach us? Could you show us how to develop these abilities?" The old monk looked around at the faces surrounding him. Human defenders who had fought bravely against impossible odds. Alien soldiers who were beginning to question everything they thought they knew about strength and power. Scientists and engineers trying to understand phenomena that challenged their basic assumptions about reality. "Yes," he said simply. "But understand that this is not about gaining power over others. It is about discovering the power within yourself, the power to create rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to understand rather than conquer." Fleet Commander Zeth Cole's final transmission came as his ships prepared to leave the system. "We returned to our home worlds with new questions. Our conquest of 17 planets taught us nothing compared to what we learned today from one human teacher. Perhaps true strength lies not in the ability to take worlds, but in the wisdom to know when not to." As the Vorthak fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the people of Cathara Prime began to rebuild their colony. But they were also building something else, a school where humans could learn the ancient disciplines that Wansu represented. Students came from across human space, drawn by stories of the monk who had stopped an army with a single movement. Years later, historians would mark the Battle of Cathara Prime as the moment when humanity began to understand its true potential. Not as warriors or conquerors, but as beings capable of touching the deepest forces of the universe through consciousness itself. Lieutenant Hai Jin, now a student of the old disciplines, would often tell newcomers about that day. How silence had fallen over a battlefield. How 10,000 alien soldiers had been stopped not by weapons but by wisdom. How one old man had shown that the greatest power in the universe was not the ability to destroy, but the understanding of when a single, perfect action could change everything. And in the monasteries that sprang up on distant worlds, young humans learned to sit in silence, to quiet their minds, and to touch the infinite potential that had always existed within them. They learned that consciousness itself might be the key to understanding not just human nature, but the deepest mysteries of the cosmos. The monk Wan Su lived to see this new flowering of human potential. He spent his remaining years teaching, always emphasizing that true strength came not from power over others, but from harmony with the forces that connected all living things. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, his students found a note beside his bed. It read simply, "The universe is conscious and consciousness is the universe. When you truly understand this, you understand everything." The army had fallen silent after the monk moved once, but in that silence, humanity had found its voice.